Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Ollie, where's your bookcase? I am now back at uni and so I'm still working on my new setup. Today I have got The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. This is 271 pages. It has a 4.5-star rating on Goodreads and took me 3 days to finish. I could have finished this sooner, but this was not a book that I wanted to be reading in one sitting. Sisters Seeley and Nettie share the pain and struggle of growing up as African American women in early 20th century rural Georgia. Forced into an abusive marriage, at least Seeley can offer Nettie refuge from her violent father in her new home, until Nettie catches the attention of Seeley's husband and is forced to leave and forge her own journey. Through a series of letters spanning 20 years, first from Seeley to God, then between the two sisters, they manage to sustain their hope in each other across time, distance, and silence, and the triumph of resilience, bravery, and ultimately, love. The Colour Purple has been on my list for quite a while, as in it's been on my shelf for quite a while. I knew that it contained prominent themes significant in the Black community, and I knew that it had both a stage and theatre adaptation, but that was it. So I felt quite happy that I was going into this book without any preconceptions or ideas of what was meant to happen. After reading the synopsis, I knew that faith and love were going to be strong themes throughout this book's narrative, and so at 6:30, I couldn't wait to start reading. As I started reading, the synopsis made a lot more sense. This novel is literally made up of a collection of letters between Seeley and God, and between Seeley and her sister Nettie. So I was already somewhat curious about how the narrative would read, or if there would even be one. As these are Seeley's letters, they're written in African American dialect, which wasn't at all uncommon in the early 20th century. This book does contain some sensitive themes with regards to the treatment of African American women in the early 20th century. So I mentioned to a couple of people as I was reading it, it's really good, it's so poignant, but I'd say that you need to be in the right headspace to be able to read it. As I read this, I was almost dreading doing this review, because although I was fine reading this book, I didn't know how I'd feel addressing some of its content. The first part that made me think this was when Seeley sleeps with this man in the house that she's working in and ends up getting pregnant. Then his father says something like, "Oh, don't think this makes you part of the family." What struck me wasn't the way that he spoke to Seeley, but the fact that he said what he said and spoke to her like that, and yet didn't seem to have an issue with his son having slept with her. What then bothered me was knowing that this is something that would have happened and did happen at the time. Upper-class men would have sex with servants and then be annoyed at them when they got pregnant, to say the least. Other than the fact that some of these letters are written to God, I felt that the first obvious mention of faith was quite significant. When slaves worked on plantations, their faith was something steadfast they had to help them get through times like that. And in one of her letters to God, Seeley writes that she'd hardly had anything to eat or drink that day, but the whole time she's just thinking about being able to read her Bible at the end of the day. I was so focused on the racial themes in this book that I was almost shocked when Seeley addressed the prevalence of the near-patriarchal society, even amongst her own people. Seeley writes that it's not safe to be a woman in a family of men. That was almost immediately reinforced as someone says that they feel sorry for Seeley because she reminded them of their mother under their father's thumb. 100 pages in, I did cry. Not actually because I was sad. Now, I'm not an angry person, but in most situations where someone would be angry, I just get upset. That being said, on the occasions where I'm absolutely livid, more often than not, I'll just start crying. And there's something that Seeley writes in one of her letters that didn't actually upset me, but I did cry because I was absolutely seething. I've grown up in a family of women. and so I'm aware that I have an innate respect for and appreciation of women that a lot of men my age don't. Now, the way that Seeley describes this experience is somewhat graphic. I cried because I was so angry knowing that she'd been treated like that. Honestly, I'd probably finished this book a lot sooner than I had if I didn't need to have taken time to sort of cool off and cool down emotionally. Okay, it might be a delicate topic, but I mention it because this book dealt with it so well. The letters between Seeley and Nettie even address how the Bible today is significantly whitewashed, which then goes on to address the removal of cultural identity. Because of where they live and what they're doing, they're often told who they are. But Seeley's sister Nettie makes a point of stating, "I am a black African woman." And if you read this book, the significance of her saying that is almost beyond words. I had just over 100 pages left when I first thought, how is this book going to end? I then realised that I had no ideal ending in mind, so I was almost somewhat dubious, and after the emotions that had come with reading this book so far, I didn't really know how I felt about finishing it. Wow, so this book addressed something that most texts don't with regards to the religious theme in this novel. Seeley addresses doubting God in her letters, and even being angry with God. With regards to her current situation and what she's had to deal with, she ends up saying, what's God done for me? And her sister Nettie is her voice of reason. This book puts a lot of things in perspective with regards to priorities and values. It communicates how large parts of life are about weighing decisions and either acting on your best interest or making sacrifices for the best interests of those whom you love. With 40 pages left, I kind of felt as though I'd reached the end of the book, and then something happened that I just felt was completely unnecessary, but it reflects the reality of Seeley and Nettie's lives and the world that they live in. I just thought, after the emotional turmoil I'd experienced in the past 200 pages, this wasn't called for. But it keeps it realistic. In the early 20th century, people of colour didn't get a break just because they'd already had a hard time. Honestly, when I finished reading this, I felt exhausted, and I was emotionally exhausted. This book is brilliant in terms of what it does for you for reading it, but it's a lot, and you need to be in the right headspace to be able to read this, so I will not be reading this again anytime soon. But if you feel up to it, this is absolutely worth the read, and it definitely holds a mirror up to many of the attitudes of society. Please like and subscribe for more reviews, and hit the notification bell so you know when I upload my next video.